Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is cool. I'm looking forward to this chat.
It's a pleasure having you on. So what time is it over there today so far?
Right now, it is 8 a.m.
This question might be a little early, but what have you done? What non-negotiables have you done for your health and performance?
I've had 6 glasses of water so far, and I ran a few miles.
Wow. 6 glasses of water by 8 a.m.
I try to get in my 15 glasses by 2 p.m. so that my sleep isn't disrupted by going to the bathroom at night. Not to get too personal. But.
Interesting. So if you have water after 2 p.m., it disrupts your sleep at night?
Well, it makes it more likely that I'm going to have to wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. So yeah, I try to get in all my water by 2 p.m.
Are you up very early?
Yes, I like getting my exercise in first thing in the morning, and then B, I like starting work early. On Mondays, I try to wake up around 4:30, and then by Thursdays, most of the time it slides to 6 or 6:30. But today, because of our interview, I made sure to get up at 5.
I see. So today we're going to talk about a subject that I started researching in about 2017 and has gained more and more attention, and that is electromagnetic frequencies, or EMR, or it goes under a lot of different names now. But what is your backstory and how did you get involved in this world?
My father was Dr. Martin Blank, who was one of the world's leading scientists and advocates and activists later in his life. On the questions about EMF, in 2012, he had a contract to write a book. And this book, unlike everything he'd written in his whole career, was designed to be consumed by regular people. He asked me for some help to help him write that book, and it became known as Overpowered, and I co-wrote that with him. It's still today one of the best books on this, and most popular on this subject of EMF and health effects. And in the course of course, he was my father, so I knew the work he was doing when I was growing up, and I knew why we didn't have a microwave oven, for instance, and I knew that once I got my first cell phone after I graduated college, because that's the age you got it back then, I knew not to hold it up to my head, things like that. But beyond those basics, I wasn't really familiar with the whole topic. And so in the course of writing that book, I became really familiar with the topic. And a few points really kind of hit home for me. One is just the science on this question of EMF and health effects. It's so strong. We're talking about thousands of studies, and it's growing every year, but even 10 years ago, thousands of studies showing a wide range of negative health outcomes from exposure to these forces. But on the flip side, right, these forces, which maybe we'll get a little later, the sources of these forces are all the things that define and enable modern society and the modern economy. So there's no getting rid of EMF from our lives. And so I realized there had to be safer ways for people to relate to their technology. And that's where the idea for what became SYB came from. And I released my first product in 2013. So 1 year after that. So it's been 9 years.
Wow. It's one thing to research and know the science behind something. It's another to distill it for the public to understand. And it's even a league beyond that to create a product that your everyday person can use without having to even understand how exactly it all works.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I agree.
So if you were to summarize the health implications of electromagnetic fields, non-native electromagnetic fields, the dangerous ones, to a young kid, say a 5-year-old, how would you make them believe that this is an important topic to pay attention to?
Wow. So there's summarize and there's make believe, and then there's the target audience of a 5-year-old. So that's 3 challenges and one's very subtle. What we see, what the science shows, is that EMF exposure has a wide range of negative health outcomes. In fact, we find these negative health outcomes in virtually every biological system where we investigate for them. So, and it's not just in humans, right? We see it in all forms of life. And the science is, like I said, it's very strong. We see it in thousands of different high quality studies showing cancer is a big one, gets a lot of attention. But, even within cancer, brain tumors get a lot of the attention. But we see it in thyroid cancer. We see it in lymphoma and leukemia. In fact, childhood leukemia, which is the incidence of leukemia in children between the ages of 3 and 4, did not exist until the power grid existed. And there's a very, very important book, Dirty Electricity, by Dr. Sam Millam. And now I'm talking to you, not to the 5-year-old, by Dr. Sam Millam. And what he did is he investigated the deployment of the power grid, right? Because there was a point in time in which the United States did not have the power grid. And then it was deployed at different times in different parts of the country. And he documented a whole set of what he calls the diseases of civilization that emerged only once the power grid was deployed in an area. And so childhood leukemia is one of them. ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, is another one of them. There's this whole set, and and he did this with a very detailed analysis of death records in these different areas of the country. So, and that's just one example of the type of compelling evidence. But so I got stuck on cancer, right? So, but we don't see it just in cancer. We see it in infertility, in miscarriage, in birth defects. We see it in sleep disruption. We see it in, and you see it also, those are all diseases, right, which you can kind of study out in the populations. You see it in the lab, and you see it in how EMF destroys DNA. Just using a cell phone for 15 minutes, you can see the damage that is done to your DNA. You can see it in multiple of these physiological systems in our bodies, and so I don't know how well I did that for a 5-year-old, but that is how I kind of approach kind of expressing this stuff. The science is really significant on these various questions, and the range of negative health outcomes we see is incredibly wide.
So there's something I want to highlight, in that you said that the science is very clear, and from my own investigations, I would have to agree. But then the layperson who's just becoming introduced to this topic hears that the experts are unsure. The science is not settled. We need more evidence to show that it's actually harmful. So how are we coming to different conclusions than a lot of these news articles?
Well, media has a both sidesism bias that's implicit in their coverage of almost any topic. And there's a lot at play. There's a lot of different mechanisms in play in the dynamics that you were just talking about. But, one of them is that industry pays for a lot of science. So for all the science that I'm talking about, there's other science that is funded largely by industry that says, oh, this stuff is benign, this stuff is safe. And so they use that, and this is well documented tactics. It's known as the tobacco playbook because it was introduced and perfected by the tobacco companies to delay regulations on cigarettes and smoking for decades, when it was obvious to anyone who looked at the actual science that this stuff was causing diseases like lung cancer and emphysema. So, and I'm not the only person talking about EMF to compare to the tobacco industry, but I would bring up another example, right? So I don't know if you ever saw the movie Concussion with Will Smith. Yeah, where he played, I have it written because I never remember it, Bennett Omalu, who was a doctor who worked with NFL players. And he was documenting the incidence of CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is a serious form of brain damage. And he was seeing it in these NFL players. And he's postulating that, if you ram your head with the force of a jackhammer thousands of times in your career, right, that can cause brain damage. And you think about that, and it's friggin' obvious, right? You're ramming your head, but that wasn't the response that he got, right? You had very powerful forces in play with a lot of money on the line, although a fraction of the amount that we have behind the tech industry. And they fought him for years. And you're thinking about that, and it's just obvious that pounding your head with the force of a jackhammer thousands of times is going to cause brain damage. Well, now let's go talk about EMF. Where EMF, it's invisible, it's odorless, you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't smell it. And if you start to investigate what it actually is, it's like super complicated. There's all these words that maybe you haven't heard since sixth or seventh grade, and then a whole bunch you've probably never heard before. And then you have the fact that it comes from all of these things that we love. We love our phones. We love our computers. We love our refrigerators, right? I mean, we may not realize we love our refrigerators, but try telling someone to live without one, and then they'll realize how much they love it. And so you have all of these forces in play that make it really challenging to get this message out. But I will say, even in just the 10 years I've been involved in these issues, awareness has really grown quite a lot. And this is no longer relegated. Like when I started selling my products, my first product on Amazon, and you test for the searches that your product comes up for, right? You would get ghost detection meters coming up in the same searches, right? Because they use EMF to supposedly to detect ghosts. Now there's a ton of companies offering solutions, some better than others, but that to address these problems, because more and more people are aware of them. I'm interviewed on podcasts just like with you, right? In 2012, you were not aware of this topic. Now you are. So awareness is definitely growing, but it is still, it still has a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned that there's some subtleties in the language that these studies and these companies are using to cast some doubt on the real danger of their products and their wireless signals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think what you're getting at there is, the usage of terms like conclusive proof, right? And so when often wireless industry people talk about this, they're asked about this, they say there's no conclusive proof. There's actually a whole chapter in Overpowered, and my father was brilliant with words. He spoke multiple languages. He did the crossword puzzle every day. He loves dissecting words and the meaning of words. And in this chapter, we talk about, what does conclusive proof even mean, right? Because if we're talking about math, right, 2 + 2 = 4. You can prove that conclusively, and then every mathematician in the world has to accept that. In a court of law, you can prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, and then someone's convicted, right? So there's a clear standard. In science, that standard doesn't exist in the way, right? Proof in science means I do X, I see Y, and let me explain why I think X leads to Y. And you do that over and over again, and you publish your results so other people can do what you did and try to replicate it, see if they get the same results. And you do that over and over again. You answer you investigate multiple questions, and you get different results, and you formulate the best possible theory. And so in science, conclusive proof doesn't exist. And so when wireless industry or tech industry people talk about the absence of conclusive proof, that is a red herring. That is not the standard by which science is judged and science is used. And what we do see, like I've said, is thousands and thousands of studies where their harm is demonstrated very clearly. A lot of these are peer-reviewed. A lot of these have been replicated and reproduced by other scientists around the world. And so it doesn't matter that there isn't conclusive proof. What we have is very strong, serious evidence. And that's really the standard by which questions like these need to be judged and evaluated by consumers and regulatory agencies.
Yeah. Even the testing methods were not designed for modern times, with exposure coming from all directions via phones, microwaves, dirty electricity from bad lighting. And because of that, it seems like it's going to be hard to get an accurate gauge of the true cumulative exposure throughout the day.
Oh, it's basically impossible to do that. I mean, you can try with certain types of meters that measure that stuff, but those are incredibly expensive. Those are really reserved for research purposes, because it's not like a kind of meter you can go out on Amazon and find and buy, right? Because you need these measuring, and you need measuring multiple different sets of frequencies. And you get at a really good point, right? There's a whole bunch of EMF exposures in the United States and around the world that are totally unregulated. But even among those that are regulated, they're regulated individually. And none of them consider the whole scope of exposures that we have in modern life. So, right, so for a cell phone, there's an amount of radiation, theoretically, it's not accurately or true, but theoretically that a phone is allowed to emit. But that doesn't account for the fact that, if you use it for 1 minute, or if you use it for 2 hours every day, right? Those are totally different exposures. It doesn't account for the fact that maybe now there's 30 cell phones in the office where you're working, as opposed to back when the regulations, the currently active regulations for cell phones were imposed in the 1990s. That was not the case. It doesn't account for the fact that there's Wi-Fi networks on at the same time, much less all the electrical wiring, the nearby cell towers that are proliferating, and so on and so forth. So there's absolutely no accommodation for real world exposures in any of these regulations.
Yeah. Can you walk us through a quick primer on the science behind this without getting too technical? There's a lot of other podcasts that go deep into the mechanisms of action and everything. And there's also a book called EMF, which is a newer one by Dr. Joe Mercola. And that was a great one. He dives really deep into each of the single pathways that different forms of EMF impact. So if you guys want to check out that'll be a great resource. But for a primer, an intro to this, how would you explain it?
Right. So in terms of the mechanisms, there's really two that I like to highlight for people. So one is DNA. And I talked earlier about how EMF can harm, and I use the word destroy. Not everyone uses the word destroy, but can impact DNA. And a lot of some of the most important work in this on this particular question goes back to the 1990s. Two doctors out of Washington State named Dr. Henry Lai and Dr. Narendra Singh. And what they were studying at the time cordless phones, because cell phones weren't quite yet a thing, but it's very similar radiation. And what they found is that even 15 minutes of exposure to radiation from a cordless phone led to significant increases in strand breaks, right? So DNA is formed by two strands. They're interwoven into a double helix. That's the shape everyone knows. And so it's those two strands. What a strand break means is that either one or both of those strands actually break apart. So EMF is breaking apart those strands. And I want to underscore, DNA is in every cell in our bodies, right? It's not just in a part of our body, it's in every cell in our entire body. And when you break the strands, right, you can have a single strand break or a double strand break. If you have a double strand break, the cell will kill itself. It will engage in a process called apoptosis, which in the context of what we're talking about here is actually the preferable outcome. Because if only one of the strands break, the cell will try to repair it using the information in the other strand. And it is through that process by which mutations emerge. And it is the emergence of mutations that lead to ill health and disease. Now, even more concerning out of this study is Lai and Singh demonstrated that this increased rate of strand breaks persisted for hours after the exposure. And again, we're talking about a 15-minute exposure. Wow. And so I find that to be, A, that very important science, B, replicated many, many times, and C, I feel like a lot of people, even if they're not doctors or scientists, understand it's pretty bad when your DNA is being mutated by a force, right? So that's one. The next, which I know you're familiar with, has to do with something called the voltage-gated calcium channels, or VGCCs. What that is that's like a port on your cell that determines how much calcium can get in and out of a cell. And when excess calcium enters a cell, without going into all the details, that increases something, it creates an outcome, which a lot of people know the term is oxidation, which is a stressor on your cell. And that then contributes to multiple follow-on effects, including inflammation and accumulation of free radicals in the body. So Dr. Paul's work shows that EMF exposure leads to, through this mechanism of voltage-gated calcium channels on the cell, leads to increased oxidation, increased inflammation, increased levels of free radicals in the body. So those are two of the mechanisms that I regularly talk about, because I feel like both of them are very easily understood by people these days. But there are multiple, as you point out, there are multiple other mechanisms in play, and we're learning more about them all of the time.
Where does the distinction between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation fall into this?
Great question. So EMF, as we talked about, stands for electromagnetic fields, and there are many different kinds of EMF, and they live on what we call a spectrum. There's a spectrum of electromagnetic radiation, or the EM spectrum. Right in the middle of that spectrum is sunlight, is visible light, and that's really the only form of EMF to which all life on Earth was exposed for 4.5 billion years until the last 200 years. Now, there's certain forms of EMF with more energy than visible light, more energy than the light we get from the sun. Those are called ionizing because they have so much energy, they can knock electrons loose from the cells in our bodies. They ionize our cells. These are incredibly dangerous, and even very, very, very low doses. There's absolutely no debate about that. And these include forces like X-rays and gamma rays, as well as UV. So that's the ionizing side. And again, everyone knows that stuff is really harmful, even in the smallest doses. You want as little of that as possible. So then we have the forms of EMF with less energy than visible light. And that's what, as you mentioned, are called non-ionizing forms of EMF. And when people like me are on shows like this talking about EMF, those are the forms we are talking about, these non-ionizing. And they're called non-ionizing because they don't have the same amount of energy. They cannot knock electrons loose from the cells in our bodies. And because they can't ionize our cells, they were long believed to be benign, to be inert, to be essentially harmless to life, unless there's so many of them it actually cooks you. And so that's really the key difference between ionizing and non-ionizing. Now, what science over the last 100 years and increasingly in the last 40 years and 20 years has shown is that those original assumptions that non-ionizing EMF was benign, was harmless, those assumptions were false. In fact, we talk about this in Overpowered. That's what my father was taught at school when he went to graduate school. And that's what he taught for years when he was teaching at Columbia University Medical School until the 1980s, when he read a study by one of his colleagues, Dr. Reba Goodman, also at Columbia. And he said, this doesn't make sense. This is different than everything I'd ever been taught. And so he went and met with Dr. Goodman, and they actually ended up collaborating on multiple studies over many years. But that's just to illustrate, like, my father is one of the people most closely aligned and associated with issues of EMF and health. And even he, until the 1980s, did not believe that non-ionizing EMF was harmful. But again, the science that we see today is incredibly compelling on these questions.
It's going to take a while for the gatekeepers of the previous knowledge where non-ionizing isn't harmful, where non-ionizing was thought to be safe. It's going to take some time for that school of thought to slowly die out.
Yes, that's just how these things work. And it, like you say, it does take time. It takes conversations like this and having me have the opportunity to chat with you and reach your audience.
Yeah. Let's talk now about the way it impacts different forms of life. You mentioned earlier that it impacts plants, it impacts other animals, and also a subset of humans that are most sensitive to these electromagnetic signals.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned, right, just using the DNA example, DNA is in every cell in our body. It's in every cell of every living thing. And so when you have science showing clearly the impact that this stuff can have on DNA, it shouldn't be surprising that we see negative health outcomes across the animal kingdom and across the plant kingdom as well. And there is a lot of research on this, but I'll give a couple of examples. So there's a 2010 study published in the International Journal of Forestry Research that concluded EMF, like from cell towers, has strong adverse effects on trees. And what they did is they built Faraday cages. They built shields, or EMF shields around a whole bunch of different trees. And then they compared the health outcomes, in effect, between the shielded and the non-shielded trees. And they found that the trees that were shielded from EMF radiation grew 75% more than the trees that were not shielded from EMF radiation. And that's just one study. This is, this is a very well-researched area. Yeah. Another well-researched area has to do with birds and bees. So there is a scientist named Balmori. I think it was Dr. Alfonso Balmori. And so in one of his studies in 2009, he observed that storks that had nests within 200 to 300 meters of a cell phone base never had any chicks. So he was able to measure, and again, in this real world scenario, that the birds that nested closest to the cell phone towers were unable to reproduce. We see a lot of this research into bees, right? And it is believed that, personally, I think there are many causes of colony collapse disorder, but it is believed by many that EMF radiation is contributing to colony collapse disorder. And there's some very powerful illustrations of this, right? There's studies where they just put a phone in front of a hive and the bees never come back. So when we're talking about EMF, right, some of your listeners may not realize that birds and bees, as well as other animals and insects, they rely on the Earth's magnetic field in order to know how to navigate. And when you throw like a cell phone that's really powerful into the mix, they lose their ability to even navigate. Yeah. So, and in your question, you talked about the population of humans, a subpopulation of humans that are more sensitive to these forces. And that is called electromagnetic hypersensitivity, or EHS. Although it goes by some other names, even Wi-Fi allergies is one I'm seeing a bit more common. And what it is a poorly understood condition, and it is not universally recognized. But there are doctors who recognize and provide treatment for it. And there are a couple of governments around the world that recognize this condition and qualify it for disability and so forth. Oh, wow. But what this is a condition where people are just more sensitive to levels. So I can walk into a room and feel more or less okay. I mean, as okay as I'm ever going to feel. And someone with EHS will walk into a room and again, same room, but they will start getting rashes. They will start getting joint pain. They will start getting severe anxiety. They will not be able to go to sleep. There's a wide range of these symptoms that manifest from people who suffer from EHS. Now, because this is a poorly understood condition and because it is not universally recognized, we don't have great data on the percentage of the population that experiences this. It is estimated to be anywhere between 5 and 30% based off of work by, including Dr. Magda Havas is one who has performed that kind of work. Personally, I believe that the numbers are much higher, right? Because when we're talking about the types of symptoms that we get from that people with EHS get from EMF exposure, these are symptoms that people get all the time. How many people today have increased rates of anxiety? How many people today have trouble falling asleep? And you go through life and you're like, oh, I have trouble going to sleep. You don't think, oh, maybe I should stop sleeping with my cell phone, or, oh, maybe it's the Wi-Fi networks that are all around my apartment building. And so I believe that it's actually quite a lot, a much bigger percentage of the population that has this. And also keep in mind, right, the amount of EMF in the environment, particularly in cities, but through almost everywhere that people live, is growing each year. So it makes sense that the number of people whose symptoms would be triggered would grow each year because the levels are higher each year. Yeah. And when people talk like, how do I know this is real? Why didn't this ever exist before? Well, A, because the amount of EMF in the environment was never this high. But B, look at other conditions like peanut allergies. When I was growing up, no one had peanut allergies, and now they are incredibly common. So we see with the with the amount of EMF in the environment, but B, with the overall level of toxins in the environment, we see this increasing cross susceptibility. And this is actually well documented in terms of people with EHS. They are much more likely to have MCS, or multiple chemical sensitivity, and vice versa, right? So you see a cross susceptibility to multiple different types of toxins. And again, it's the overall level of toxins in the environment keeps growing each year. So these types of allergic reactions, I believe we will continue to see rise.
Mm-hmm. And I know from my own research that it's believed to also impact microbes.
One study I can think of by a very well-known scientist named Dietrich Klinghardt, who showed that mold spores that were exposed to EMF radiation grew at 600 times their regular rate. And that was, again, just by being exposed to EMF. And this is another example of cross-susceptibility, right? Because EMF causes mold to grow faster. More mold causes increased susceptibility to EHS symptoms, right? So it's one of these vicious cycles that we see form.
I lived in a place that had a mold problem and also had a Wi-Fi router right in there. So it sounds like the perfect storm to increase susceptibility for these deleterious effects. Yeah,
mold is really, I a long time ago, but I lived in a place that had a mold problem, and it's brutal. It is really bad for your health. But a lot of places have mold problems, even if you don't know it. So it's one of these forces that's really harmful to our health.
Yeah. Okay, let's also now discuss some of the long-term and immediate effects EMFs can have on your health and performance, because before this, I had heard that cell phones might cause cancer, and I said, yeah, that's a problem that I'll deal with in 20, 30 years. But really, it starts long before that.
With voltage-gated calcium channels, that is an immediate effect. And when you start increasing the inflammation in your body, you start to see all sorts of negative health outcomes in very short order. When I talked about DNA, I mentioned how exposure to this stuff can break apart the strands of DNA. And I said, and sometimes there's, because there's two strands of DNA, the cell can repair itself. But something that doesn't have two strands of DNA is your sperm. And so if you start breaking apart the DNA, the sperm is just going to die. The sperm cell is going to die because there's no second strand there. And in fact, that is one of the very well documented areas of EMF health effects is the growth in infertility and subfertility, and particularly in males, right? Because in females, you have the eggs are buried kind of deeper in the body. There's more natural insulation there. But in the case of sperm, that is it's dangling outside of the body, for lack of a better term, and it's very exposed and very close to pockets where men carry phone. Well, everyone carries phones, and also where people tend to use their laptops. And so you see these in study after study after study. People who carry their phones in their pockets have very much worse sperm counts. Now, there's a little bit of good news there for people, right? Because sperm is regenerated approximately every 24 hours. So if you remove the phone from the pocket, you can see the improvement in about a day. Or if you start wearing, radiation shielded underwear, you can see the improvement in sperm counts in about a day.
Wow.
Other negative health outcomes that you start seeing in very rapid order, right? I mentioned sleep disruption before. There's a bunch of mechanisms involving the endocrine system, EMF exposure in the endocrine system. And one of the results of that is decreased melatonin production. And that then leads to poor or disrupted sleep. And that's another one of these vicious cycles, right? Because when you're getting poor or disrupted sleep, your body is less able to heal itself and regenerate for the following day. And you can kind of create this downward spiral. So those are just a few of the examples. There's all sorts, right? There's, based on the current state of science, we don't know whether it's the EMF or the digital experience or the dopamine triggers that are being integrated into these platforms, or but we do know that the tech is causing these harms, and using less of it makes you healthier and more resilient.
Yeah. A couple other effects I want to highlight. I saw a paper a while back where it breaks down the blood-brain barrier and also the blood-gut barrier and the blood-testes barriers. So that could lead to some immediate issues and then also long-term as well.
One of the works that shows that is done by Dr. Leif Salford, another one of the very important scientists in this area. And he showed that EMF exposure leads to increased permeability or leakage of the blood-brain barrier. And for those of your listeners who don't know, that's a very important barrier that surrounds your brain. And when it permeates, you're creating pathways for viruses to enter and other pollutants, but viruses being a big one, to enter the brain, viruses that otherwise wouldn't be able to enter the brain. And so and again, yeah, that is very important research. I'm glad you brought that up.
And when that happens, when things enter the brain that shouldn't, it causes inflammation, which then slows down your processing speed. Your memory becomes a little hazy, which is why brain fog is often reported as a symptom of exposure.
The VHS and EMF exposure. Yep, exactly.
And then also because of the free radical theory of aging, this would also, like, increasing your cumulative exposure would also make you age faster.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense.
Let's talk about now what are the different types of EMFs? Because we've talked a lot about one subset, and that's radio frequencies, but what about the others?
Well, radio frequency is a big one, and sometimes it's called microwave also. They're basically used interchangeably in the science. And those are the types of EMF that are emitted by anything that communicates wirelessly. So obviously that includes cell phones, it includes Wi-Fi, it includes Bluetooth, so AirPod headsets. It includes TV for those people who still get TV when I'm talking, like, not over the internet, but like to an antenna. It includes radio. It includes radar. It includes anything that communicates wirelessly. That is happening in this range. Then another big range is called ELF, or extremely low frequency. And these are the types of EMF that are emitted by anything that runs on power. So that includes power plants, power lines, electrical appliances. It's the kind of EMF that's emitted by your refrigerator, even if it's a really, dumb one without a computer in it. And so those are the two big kinds. There are some others, but those are the two big kinds that are emitted into our environment and that are studied in the science. Again, and so with some devices, they can be big sources of both. A common example I use is microwave ovens. Microwave ovens are called microwave ovens because they use microwaves to cook your food. So that's microwave radio frequency radiation that comes out through the leakage of those chambers. But in order to create that level of microwave, in order to generate that much power, you're using a tremendous amount of electricity, which then emits ELF. And so microwave ovens give you a big double dose of this stuff, which is why it's so important to stand as far away as possible from those things ideally not use them at all, but to stand as far away as possible from them when they are in use. And that's a good example. If you read the manual, they tell you pregnant women shouldn't use this, right? That should be a pretty big warning sign right there.
Yeah. In a second, I want to cover some of the most pernicious and common everyday sources of EMF. Even in my own experimentation, when I measure what's coming off my microwave from 10 feet away, from 20 feet away, it's off the charts.
When you look at the science, right, the levels that we see trigger these negative health outcomes, right? And I'm glad you brought this up, because sometimes it can get a little lost. And when we were just talking, like, oh yeah, EMF can cause these issues, but I'm not exposed to that much, right? No, what the science is showing is like minuscule levels of this stuff, really minuscule levels are thresholds for harm, right? Far, far, far less than you get from just talking on your cell phone, much less having all of these cell phones on cell phone towers, Wi-Fi networks, your microwave oven. And so even if you stand 10 feet away from your microwave oven, if you have a good meter, you're going to see the levels are still really high. I mean, it's much safer to stand 10 feet away than right up against it. But the levels, even 10 feet away, are really, really high. These things have so much power. That's the name of the book that I wrote with my father, was Overpowered. And that is, they have so much power. And that includes the cell phone in your pocket. These things are incredibly overpowered devices.
What R just mentioned is that basically anything that has a cord will put off an ELF.
Yes.
So when you're working next to a power strip with cords going to your laptop, to your monitor, to all kinds of gadgets and gizmos, or you're sleeping with an alarm clock and the cord running right behind your head, if you can, it's best to try and reconfigure that cord to increase the distance between your body and the source, the cord.
Yes, very good advice. And when possible, switch to battery powered. So a battery powered alarm clock is going to have much lower levels of EMF almost negligible compared to like an alarm clock that you plug into the wall. That is a very common, actually decreasingly common, because now everyone's using cell phones instead of alarm clocks, but still quite a common source. And it tends, as you pointed out, tends to be right next to your head or very close to your head. And whenever I'm staying in a hotel room, that's one of the first things I do is I find the alarm clock, which is still in a huge number of hotel rooms, and I unplug it. I can't unplug all the Wi-Fi on the floor, but I can get rid of that alarm clock next to my head.
Yeah. So what are some of the other sources that we should pay attention to?
Well, the cell phone in your pocket is a huge one. So one of the top things generally the first thing I tell people if they're concerned about this stuff and they want to start making changes is stop carrying your phone in your pocket or your bra. And in fact, this is another, I mentioned, if you look at the microwave manual, it says, pregnant women shouldn't use it. This is another one of those things where if you actually read the manual, like, you're not supposed to carry this phone in your pocket or your bra, and you're not actually supposed to hold it up to your head, even though that's clearly what they design it for. And so, or if you do need to carry it in your pocket or your bra, put it into airplane mode before you do, because when it's in airplane mode, virtually all of the EMF is cut off. So that is a huge one. Even though it's an obvious one, I just want to underscore for people, it is huge, right? When these things are so powerful, right? It's really like they have to communicate for miles, and that's just the cell connection, right? They also have Wi-Fi, they also have Bluetooth, they also have NFC. Increasingly, they have multiple radio cards, they have multiple wireless transmitters built in. And when it's right up against your body, you are getting the maximum possible dose that this thing has to give. And so even with all of the sources of EMF, and I don't think you can actually quite pick it out, but there's a cell tower right across the street over there, right? With all of these sources in our environment, for a lot of people, their relationship with their cell phone is going to be a huge source, if not the biggest source of their own personal exposure in their life. So personal cell phone hygiene etiquette is going to make a huge difference. But beyond that, wearable technology, right? Apple Watches, for instance, are increasingly popular. When you have those on, you're being exposed nonstop while you have it on. AirPods and other Bluetooth headsets are another one. The closer that something is to your body, in general, A, the closer it is to your body, and B, the longer you are designed to use it. In general, these are going to be the biggest sources of your own personal exposure. So I strongly recommend never to use Bluetooth headsets. I strongly recommend never to use smartwatches. And increasingly, you're seeing, smart glasses. Facebook has them. Snap has them. Other companies now have them. Apple is rumored to be coming out with a pair soon. These things, they're right up against it's not just your brain, although, that's pretty important too. It's your eyes are incredibly vulnerable to this sort of stuff. And there's all sorts of nerves that are very important right there in your head. And again, these are things, they're not just sources of EMF. They're ones that are right up against your body that are designed to be used for extended periods of time. because the time of the exposure also matters quite a bit. So these are the sources that I spend most of my time talking about, because we are facing the introduction of more, and we're finally entering the era of wearable tech. And, it's been one of these things that people have talked about for years, and it's actually happening now. And if you have kids, don't get your kids this stuff. If you want to have kids, don't do it yourself, right? The use case, there's no way to use this stuff more safely, is I guess what I'm saying, right? It's impossible for me, I make products that reduce your exposure to this kind of stuff. It's impossible for me or anyone like me to make a product that makes AirPods safer to use. It's impossible for me or anyone like me to make a product that makes snap glasses easier or safer to use, right? The use cases of this whole new generation of technology make it such that it is impossible to use them more safely. And so those are I will get down off of my soapbox and let you continue the interview.
Yeah, so I agree with you. When I talk to people about this and they're interested in reducing their exposure, the first question I always ask them is about their cell phone habits, because you can have like a perfectly optimized house in pristine environment, but if you're walking around with your cell phone pressed up against your leg, or God forbid your breasts all day, that's going to have a seriously detrimental effect, more so possibly than a lot of the other things that would be in your environment.
Yes. Yeah, totally agree. That's a great example of something that I just want to state explicitly, which is that distance really matters, right? So with EMF, if you have your phone and it's an inch away from your body, and then you take it and now it's 2 inches away from your body, the power of that exposure, of your exposure, has been cut by 75%. And that's because the power of EMF radiation diminishes exponentially with distance. And that's why when people like us are saying, don't carry your phone in your pocket, that's why that's so important, right? Because the further away it is from your body, you're making huge differences in terms of what your actual exposure is to that force. And the same is true we talked about the microwave oven, standing as far away as possible from the microwave oven. The Wi-Fi routers, keeping the Wi-Fi router wherever you live, keeping it as far away from where you spend your time as possible. Distance is your friend with EMF.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about remediation steps in a second, because I don't want to make this all about the doom and gloom and the problems that are coming with increasing EMF exposure. But before we do, I want to talk about two other things, and that is solar power and electric cars. What are your thoughts on those?
So solar power is a tough one, because I'm a big believer in not only in green energy, but in the need for green energy. And the issues with solar, unfortunately, when it comes to EMF, they're not limited to just solar. They are shared between solar, wind, and hydro. And that is, our power grid is built on AC, alternating current. And when you are generating renewable energy through solar or wind or hydro, you are generating DC, and it's stored in batteries. In order to convert DC into AC, right, in order to power the grid, you need an inverter, a power inverter. And these power inverters are tremendous sources of dirty electricity. Dirty electricity is another kind of EMF that flows through the grid, right? So it doesn't get emitted by a cell phone. It gets introduced into the power grid and then flows around the grid, and then is emitted off of all of the wiring that is connected to. And solar power is a big one, because more and more people are going solar. And when you do, you introduce a tremendous amount of this dirty electricity. And that is very hard to address. There are certain products out there like dirty electricity filters, but you need an expert to really work with you to really customize the implementation in your home to get this stuff working properly. And so that's the big issue with solar. And it's one, I wish industry had some kind of incentive to help fix that. Right, because right now there's no reason for them, right? There's no public pressure, there's no regulations restricting how much dirty electricity can be put out onto the grid, right? So there's absolutely no incentive, which means more and more people going solar are going to be exposing more and more people to dirty electricity. Now, when it comes to electric cars, this is an area where there is almost basically no regulation, right? And when we're talking about EMF exposure, but electric cars are making more people aware of this, but this is true for all cars, right? There's no regulations and we just did an article on the Shield Your Body site about cars. And we were looking, we're like, like when you buy a cell phone, you can at least look how much theoretically, it's how much radiation it's supposed to, because the manufacturer has to publish a number. Now there's a whole bunch of reasons why that number may not be entirely accurate, but they have to, right? Same for Apple Watch, right? I may not believe the numbers, but Apple has to actually say, this is how much radiation. When you buy a car, how much radiation is it exposing you to? You have no idea. They don't have to tell you. And increasingly with these cars, right, it's not just the fancy Teslas, it's any car is going to have some kind of Bluetooth. It may have some kind of wireless satellite signal in order to get like OnStar to work, or a cell modem. It may have Wi-Fi as well as Bluetooth. Like, you have no idea really all the different things that are running in the car, and you have no idea how much you're being exposed to. So yes, in general, an electric car will expose you to more than a conventional car, and a hybrid car will in general expose you to more than an electric car, because hybrids have those inverters that I was just talking about. And so, but with all cars, it's one of these examples where it's just from my perspective, it is essentially unregulated in terms of what your EMF exposure from a car is. And yes, as more and more cars switch electric, that is going to become a bigger issue. And it's unfortunate, right? Because as I said before, I'm a big believer in the need for green energy. And what we're seeing, the way it's working right now, the more that it's being deployed, we're seeing just more and more and more of this harmful EMF put into our environment. And it's very unfortunate. Like, it doesn't have to be this way. If there was some kind of regulation in place guiding development of these products and these technologies and these platforms, then they would be engineered at an earlier stage to be safer. But what we are doing is deploying these networks and without those regulations in place to guide the development to be safer and healthier. And now that, that infrastructure gets in place. And then it becomes even more difficult, more expensive, more challenging to make that infrastructure healthier.
Yeah. When I recently bought a car, I was looking through the different options. I considered a hybrid, I considered electric, and wanted to do that for the planet's sake, but then also realized I'd be sitting on a huge, super powerful battery.
Yeah.
And then I was also deciding between year models. And when I looked at some of the newer ones, I'm like, how many different signals are coming off this? There's like sonar, there's Bluetooth, there's like built-in Wi-Fi, there's all kinds of different things. And I don't have a need to have Wi-Fi in my car. So I'm going to forego as many of these as possible, because a lot of them don't even allow you to put the car into airplane mode.
Yep. Yeah, I rented a car recently, and I'd never used Android Auto before. So I was, this is kind of cool. Like, I get in the car and I'm like, okay, let me experiment with it. So I turned on Bluetooth, and then I don't remember which told me. It was either the car told me or the phone told me. It's like, this will work a lot better if you turn on Wi-Fi. And it auto turned on Wi-Fi for me. I'm like, I didn't want Wi-Fi on. I thought Bluetooth was bad. But yeah, I have a super low tech car in real life, not when I'm renting. And in fact, the only thing it had in it was a radio that had Bluetooth. And this radio was really annoying because you couldn't turn off the Bluetooth. And fortunately or unfortunately, my car was broken into and the radio was stolen. And I said, I don't need a radio. And so now there's a huge hole in my dashboard where the radio was. And I'm like, yeah, it was like the one source of human-made EMF in my car. I'm like, good, it's gone.
Yeah. Okay, so what can people do to reduce their exposure and live more healthy from an EMF perspective?
Sure. So it comes down to what I call the two key rules of EMF protection, which I've already alluded to. But one is minimizing your use of EMF technology, right? And there's it's obvious, right? If you want less exposure to EMF radiation, use less of it. But there's a lot of ways to do that without sacrificing your enjoyment of modern technology. So One that I tell people a lot of my customers do this right away once they come to Shield Your Body and start reading our stuff, is to turn off your Wi-Fi at night, right? Ideally, you get rid of Wi-Fi, you switch over to Ethernet and have a hardwired home or apartment. But a lot of people, that's a big step. So they keep their Wi-Fi, but turn it off at night when you're going to sleep. That is not going to harm you or your enjoyment of modern technology. This is when you're not even using the networks.
Yes. And also the most important time for your body when it's trying to repair and regenerate.
Exactly. Yeah. You want to enhance your sleep as much as possible. Another example of that is right on your phone when it's on, like when it's communicating, right? There's, as I said earlier, there's multiple wireless cards in play, right? So when I say turn your phone into airplane mode, maybe you can't do that. Maybe you're expecting a call or you need to be connected, but turn off some of them, right? So turn off the Bluetooth. If you need your phone to be online, but you're not using Bluetooth, turn off the Bluetooth. If you can use Wi-Fi calling instead of the cell network, turn off the cell network and the Bluetooth and keep the Wi-Fi on, right? There are all these options to actually reduce the amount of EMF coming off of your phone, again, without reducing your enjoyment of modern technology. So, and the one I'll just underscore that I said earlier is, don't buy AirPods. Use a wired headset. You can opt out of a lot of this stuff without impacting your enjoyment of technology. Now, the second, that was rule number one, that was minimize. Mm-hmm. Second rule is maximize. You want to maximize the distance between your body and the source of EMF when it is in use. And we talked about this already, right? Don't carry your phone in your pocket or your bra. That is like the number one thing. I also use the example of stand as far away as possible from your microwave oven when it's on. Keep the Wi-Fi router as far away as possible from where you and your loved ones spend your time when you're at home, right? These are all examples, and they make huge differences because you're not going to get rid of all of your EMF exposure in the modern world. There's just no way. That shouldn't be your goal. Your goal should be finding ways to use less of the EMF emitting tech and to be as far away from it as possible when you are using it. And then you are making huge differences in your personal EMF exposure. And so those are the two key ways. And then once you've done those, then you can start considering EMF protection products like the ones that I make and sell. So, I say don't carry your phone in your pocket or your bra. That is, again, the number one thing. But there are people who do, who either because they insist on it or because they actually need to. For instance, certain people need it for their job. They need their phone to be on, and it needs to be on their body because there's nowhere else to carry it as they're walking around. And so that's when, for instance, my SYB phone pouch can come in handy. And that is a good way to use an EMF protection product to reduce your exposure. But the first step should be eliminating as many of the sources as possible or weakening them as much as possible with distance before starting to investigate and evaluate EMF protection products.
And then what about if people can't put it on airplane mode and they don't have a product? Is there anything else they can do? Like, what about the harmonization technologies, such as either grounding or some of the stickers or different things you can apply to your devices?
Sure. So a lot of these types of solutions, there is no science to demonstrate their efficacy, and there is no way of testing their claims. And in my experience, harmonizers fall into that category. Notice I was very precise in my wording. I am not saying that they don't work. I am saying that there is no way to verify their product claims, and their claims are not based on any science of which I'm aware. Now, I have clients, customers who use products like that and say they work, and I say keep on using it. If it's working for you, definitely keep on using it. But when we're talking about products like mine, like we make at Shield Your Body, these are all based on shielding technology, which has existed for almost 200 years since Michael Faraday first invented the Faraday cage. And what he showed is if you weave conductive metals into certain patterns, you can block and deflect certain frequencies of EMF in the other direction, just like a window shade blocks and deflects sunlight. Yeah. And all of my products are based on this type of shielding technology. They are all tested in a lab and we post the results, and they can be tested by consumers at home with EMF meters that are of a certain quality. Not the $20 ones, but like the $150 ones. You can actually verify. But you also mentioned grounding, and grounding is a really good practice. Now, what grounding means is actually it's bringing your body into contact with the ground or with the earth. It's also sometimes called earthing. And what that allows you to do as an organism is to discharge accumulated positive ionization. And that then leads to reduced levels of free radicals, reduced levels of inflammation and oxidation. It is a very good practice. Now, when I say it's a good practice, I'm talking about actually coming into contact with the earth or the ground, meaning walking barefoot in a park, walking barefoot on the beach, walking barefoot in your backyard if you can. There are certain classes of products out there that are grounding products, meaning you actually plug them into the ground, that third prong, that ground prong in your outlets. And so you can get grounding sheets, you can get grounding mats, you can get grounding all sorts of products these days, and you plug them into the wall. When you do that, they allow you to discharge the positive ionization like we talked about, but they also start exposing you to pollutants from the grid itself. And so I am not an advocate for using grounding products like that. Although we do at SYB now have a product, it's called the NCB, or the nuisance current blocker, that makes it safer to do that, right? By filtering out those harmful forces. So you can plug your grounding mat into the NCB and then plug your NCB into the wall, and it will filter out a lot of those pollutants from the ground wire, and it makes it safer to practice grounding at home using those types of products that I was just talking about.
That's good to know, because I have several grounding mats and I use them regularly. So I guess I should pick up that new product that you guys offer.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's this year. That's our newest product.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so we have the NCB that allows you to just plug in like a grounding mat into it. We also have the NCB Pro, which has to be professionally installed, that allows you to clean the entire grounding conductor on the circuit. So anything you plug in will benefit from that.
Oh, that's really cool. What do you recommend if people are just getting started with shielding? Where should they look or shield first?
Well, so my advice, and it's not that I wish I had a simpler, easier answer on this one, but because we get this question a lot, or some version of this question a lot. And my advice to people is, if you are concerned about EMF and you've done the base, if you're concerned, you've probably already done the basics, meaning if you can stop carrying your phone in your pocket, you've done that. If you can switch from Wi-Fi to Ethernet, you've done that. All the basics you've done. And so how do you know where you need protection? And the answer is to get a decent meter and learn how to test. And I don't make or sell meters, but there are several that I recommend. And I have a free ebook. It's really, I think, a very good ebook that explains to people how to test. So I recommend certain meters. Again, I don't make or sell them. I don't profit off of it. But you need a decent one. And so I recommend, and then I explain to people how they can test. And then I also explain what levels might be worth worrying about versus ones that don't. And that's what I recommend as a first step for anyone interested in before buying EMF protection. And so that ebook, if I may, it's shieldyourbody.com/test, and you can get it for free. That's the best place to start for, and I know not everyone's going to do it, but that's what everyone should do, is get a decent meter and learn how to test. Because you're not going to know, right? And I'll give you an example. Like you could, because there could be wiring in the wall that's just wonky. It was done badly. Because a lot of electricians don't know to measure this stuff. It's not part of the standard by which they build wiring into homes. And there could be just a huge electric field coming off of one part of your living room wall. And you would have no way of knowing that unless you measured. And that could be an example where if you just moved your couch, 4 feet to the right, you and your family are exposed to way less EMF, but you're never going to know that unless you actually measure. Because again, this stuff is invisible, it's odorless, it's tasteless. The only way you're going to know is if you learn how to measure. And so I'm a big advocate for people to learn how to measure.
Yeah, me too. And I will put the link to your ebook in the show notes. And if people are interested in picking up an SYB product or multiple and to help reduce their cumulative exposure, where can they do that?
Sure. Thank you for that as well. It's shieldyourbody.com. That's shieldYourBody, all one word, .com. And that's, we have, our whole catalog is available there, and we have shipping all around the world. So we can cater to almost everybody.
And I think we created a special code for the listeners. I believe it's Urban. Do you know the specifics of that?
No, but we can decide that right now, live in real time. So how about 15% off your first order with the coupon?
Perfect.
How's that? Is that good?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, I will make sure that's created as soon as this interview is over. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and one other question is that I'm wearing headphones right now, and I listen to a lot of stuff on podcasts, audiobooks, you name it. And I have known that to avoid Bluetooth headphones, but I also was aware of a problem that there might be with wired headphones as well.
Yeah, and so I want to be clear. I never discourage people from using wired headphones. They are always better than a Bluetooth headset or holding the phone up to your head or anything like that. So if all you have is wired headphones, use them and don't spend too much time worrying about it. But if you're really focused on reducing your EMF exposure and optimizing your EMF exposure profile, right? Wired headphones, they are wired. And so they can conduct radiation from your phone up into your ears.
Is that ELF?
It'll be mostly radio frequency, but it'll also be some coming off of the battery. So it's mostly the RF, because your phone is sending and receiving all of this RF. And so, and you're basically plugging an antenna into it, and then, which is the wire in the headphone. And so it'll conduct some of it up to your ears. And so we make air tube headsets. And what air tubes do is at a certain point along the wire, the wire stops and the sound gets converted to air. And those, because there's no wire there, the radiation conduction stops. Now, the problem with air tubes is that they don't sound so great. Even the best ones, they just don't sound that great because air isn't as good a conductor of sound as wire is. So another solution, and so I use air tubes all the time, but I use them for calls and for podcasts. I don't listen to music with them. I don't watch TV on my phone, but I wouldn't watch a video on my phone with them. So what another product we have is called the HARD, the headset anti-radiation device. And that's that's an adapter that's also a filter. And what that does is you plug the HARD into your phone and then you put your headsets into the HARD. And that filters out that stray radiation. And this is laboratory tested. We have the report on the website. It filters out the stray radiation and turns it into a tiny amount of heat that dissipates off of the adapter itself. So you never even sense it. And what's great about the HARD is not only do you not lose the sound quality like you do with the air tubes, it actually improves the sound quality. In fact, that's how the product was initially developed by the inventor, because by stripping off that stray radiation from the sound signal, you're actually improving the audio quality. And so that's why I love the HARD, because not only do you not get the poorer sound quality from the air tubes, you get the enhanced sound quality of actually stripping that interference off of the signal. That's really cool. And you can use any headset that you want.
Wow. Yeah, that's another thing I'm adding to my SYB shopping list. Okay, we're going to start wrapping up now, but sure. Before we do, if there was a burning of the books and all knowledge on Earth is gone, what 3 works would you choose to keep and why?
Okay, so that is a tough question because I used to be cool and hip and motivated but now I'm older, more boring. But there's one that I wouldn't have answered this the same way even 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I was just cleaning out a storage unit. And I basically pared all the books that I owned down to one box. So I just had to go through this process. And one that made the cut, I realized, well, if it made the cut, it's clearly important to me, are the works of Edward Tufte, who is a statistician and information designer. And I realized once I don't do this kind of work anymore, but I used to earlier in my career. His works were so important and so significant to me that they made it into the box. Another is Jack Kornfield, who is a a Buddhist philosopher whose meditation recordings, his discussions were really important to me earlier in my life. And then a third, it's another book. It's not like it was a seminal work. It was just very important to me. Is called Einstein's Dreams, and I don't even remember who wrote it, but it's a physicist, and it's a work of fiction. And what he did was he kind of imagined what was Einstein dreaming every night before he came up with the theory of relativity. And it's just this fantastic exploration of, it's an imaginative approach to the types of dreams that someone like that would have in the lead up to coming up with such a revolutionary set of findings. So those were the three.
I love it. A diverse collection as well.
Thank you.
What area of your own health and performance are you currently working on?
So, well, as you know, I'm not at home right now. That's so as you see in the background. But when I'm at home, the thing I've been working on this year is taking longer walks barefoot on the beach. So we were talking about grounding.
Yeah.
And so this year, we have been taking like 10-mile walks barefoot on the beach as regularly as possible. And it's been wonderful, both for the mood and for the body. And so I'm very much looking forward to getting back home and resuming that practice.
Yeah, killing multiple birds with one stone.
Exactly.
All right, what's one thing that your tribe does not know about you?
Okay, so I actually used to live, work, and study in Russia, Estonia, and in Georgia. And I actually built the website for the Parliament of the Republic of Georgia back in 1996. So reaching way back into my history there to come up with a trivia factoid for you.
Yeah, what an accolade. Well, how would you like to end our episode today? Any final thoughts?
Yeah. So, when we talk about, well, when I talk about issues like this, I know it can be, like just a little unpleasant or terrifying, because these forces, they really are harmful. But, the message I like to leave people with is I want people to become more aware of the ways in which their relationship with technology impacts their health, right? Your listeners to your show obviously are very concerned with optimizing their health. And I want people to become more aware that they are in control of a lot of the ways in which technology impacts their health. We are all more in control of this than we think. And, even as there's tons of cell towers out there and you turn on the Wi-Fi and on your computer and you see there's like 30 networks popping up, and you are the one in control of this stuff, and you have a lot of the way in which you personally interact with the technology around you will really dictate a lot about the health impacts of your relationship with technology. And there are a lot of ways in which we can modify our behaviors and adapt them so that we can live healthier and happier alongside modern technology. And so hopefully at the end of the day, people can just have a little bit more awareness of these, the health mechanisms that are in play here, and then realize, oh, I am the one in control here. I can make a big difference in my health, not just by having protein powder or microgreens, but also, turning off my cell phone at night and never bringing it into the bedroom, and kind of grouping it in with those types of human optimization practices.
Yeah, you're bringing awareness to the invisible forces and stressors that shape our life, and through education, only then can we help improve and optimize those. Exactly.
Yes. And I really thank you for the opportunity to chat with you and to help educate your audience just a little bit on these issues.
Yeah, thanks for demystifying this subject and for joining me on the Mind Body Peak Performance podcast today, R.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, until next time, I'm Nick Urban here with R. Blank, signing out from mindbodypeak.com. Have a great week and be an outlier. I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. I love knowing who's in the 1% committed to reaching their full potential. Comment 1% below so that I know who you are. For all the resources and links, meet me on my website at mindbodypeak.com. I appreciate you and look forward to connecting with you. As a reminder, the information depicted in this video is for information purposes only. Please